Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at the top 10 rock frontmen. Now, of course, this again is one of those ludicrously subjective lists, and I'm inevitably going to annoy and irritate almost all of you with my choices. But that's what the comments below are for, so we can argue about it later. What's the criteria for this list? Well, I'm looking for people who have physical presence, charisma, their vocal stylings. These people who really bring something extra onto the stage with them. They have a uniqueness in their style, something we might not have seen before, but also something that's been hugely influential and has been copied maybe by many other singers since. People who've become so well known that, to a degree, you could almost parody everything they do. I do feel a little bit qualified to talk about this list. I've been frontman for one of my bands for over 20 years and played over thousands of gigs and festivals over the years, including Glastonbury, I might name drop. But the other thing is, by coincidence, when I looked at this list after I'd drawn it up, I realised that I had seen everyone on this list live at least twice. So, like I say, I do feel fairly well qualified as a front person myself and as somebody who has been out there in the crowd watching all these people plying their trade. So, with that said, let's get on with the list. And at number 10, I'm going to put Lee Brilleaux from Fleetwood Mac. What am I saying? Lee Brilleaux from Dr. Feelgood. Now, we've talked a little bit about Dr. Feelgood before in the live albums list. Lee Brilleaux he had this aggressive, menacing stance. He wasn't the greatest singer in the world, but his onstage attitude, it carried a threat about him that spilled over into his bands and into the music. He was the perfect foil to Wilco, the bug-eyed crazy guitarist, always on his right, who was machine gunning the crowd with his guitar solos. You always felt there was something a bit dangerous about Lee Brilleaux, the way he held the microphone, the way he looked at the crowd, the way he stood there with his dirty suit on. The delivery and the stance were one thing, but you also really got the impression that he lived the lyrics he was singing. He didn't write the lyrics. Wilco wrote most of them. But, when you get that vibe that the singer could actually be living out the words they're singing, for example, the words on Rock Set or Going Back Home, then that's a really, really good sign that there's absolutely no BS in the music or in the performance. The pub rock scene in England, which mutated into punk to some degrees, has been massively influential all over the world. The Canvey Island heritage of music that we have here is one that people are still fascinated by today. And Lee Brilleaux is very, very much the towering, iconic figure of that music scene. And that says an awful lot about the lasting, enduring appeal of his image and his band, Dr. Feelgood. At number 9, I am going to start the controversy by putting Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin. I know, it's a bit low, and even I surprised myself. Robert Plant, of course, is the archetypal rock god. Lean, good-looking, bronzed torso on show. He was the pretty face out front, fronting the dark machine that was Led Zeppelin behind him, rumbling away on stage with so much power and scope in the music. It would be very, very easy to get lost in all of that. But Robert Plant, of course, had this incredible voice, this, the huge wailing banshee sounds that he could get, particularly in the early days. It did change as time went on. He lost a bit of that higher register, and I can hear in his voice that he perhaps got a little bit less, confident. It would be unfair maybe, but I think he realised he'd lost that high register, and he adjusted his singing a little bit to the point where they changed the key of some of the Led Zeppelin songs when they reformed in 2007. There's no denying Robert Plant's influence on thousands and thousands of singers. But, he didn't really move around on stage that much. I mean, he didn't need to. He looked great. He was lit beautifully with his hair and his hairless torso and his bronzed body. I mean, he was the golden god. But I just think as far as overall charisma, bringing that to the stage, there are other singers who bring a little bit more. Now that makes it sound like I'm no fan of Robert Plant. Don't get me wrong, I'm one of Robert Plant's biggest fans, but hear me out and listen to the rest of the list, okay? At number 8, from The Who, Roger Daltrey. Roger Daltrey's image changed a lot over the years. You know, he was this impish, in-your-face mod in the early days in the 60s. And then he became this sort of fringe-jacketed, bare-torsoed, bare-chested demigod. Clearly, having a bare chest is something, you know, I should have done in my bands over the years, but I think people would have run a mile. And I think as he, you know, you watch the Monterey show, and he's a completely different beast to the one he was just a few years earlier. His voice got bigger with it. He started twirling microphones around on stage 20 feet in the air and adding these huge screams into his music. His vocal styling really changed to suit the scope of the music as it got bigger and bigger. And he can still do it today. I saw The Who not long ago, and he was singing absolutely brilliantly. I think Roger Daltrey is really acutely aware of a vocalist's role in the band, and he seems to be very on top of the music that Pete Townshend gives him, and the songs that he is able to sing, the songs he can bring something to, and the songs he can't. I think he's made the absolute most of his gifts, both physical and vocal, Roger Daltrey, and he's a lead singer I have tremendous respect for. And number 7, not someone we've talked about very much at all in my series, Bono from U2. Bono, of course, has a huge voice, and he uses it very well on record. But it's when you get into an arena and hearing it just soaring over the crowd, I think you hear it in its most powerful setting. It becomes a very different beast then. And Bono himself does as well. I think on stage he becomes a larger-than-life character than he is on record. Again, he's very aware of his role in the show, visually. He's happy to sometimes be that cog in the huge U2 wheel, you know, because there's going to be this enormous screen, the biggest screen ever created behind him, or the biggest something else. You know, U2's show is enormous. And so he is aware of when he has to step out in front of that show and drive it, or when he has to step back into it. You cannot control crowds that large without having, you know, tremendous presence, both vocal and physical. And Bono's never afraid to go for the big statements. You know, you look at the Live Aid hug. He loves slipping into other songs and doing segues into unexpected pieces of music while U2 are sort of rumbling away behind him. You know, social politics really drives so much of what they do, and sometimes it's hard to digest the message, but I do think he is sincere, and I do think U2 are one of those bands who are absolutely driven by good intentions. And again, I you know, they may not be my favourite band, but I do have a tremendous respect for them. At number 6, my front man becomes a front woman, and I'm going to choose Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac. Now, we've talked about Stevie Nicks before. I know some of you are not huge fans, but there's no denying her onstage presence. She started off as a very fine singer, and again, she has lost some of that range. But as we've said, you don't have to be a great singer to be a great front person. When we think of Stevie Nicks, we think of the silk and the chiffon and the twirling round and the batons and the whirling dervish and all these things. And I've said before, I've seen Stevie a few times live, and once I was in the front row at Earl's Court, and I was absolutely captivated. I wasn't expecting to be so entranced by her performance. It's when a rock singer can create some kind of enduring appeal that you know you've crossed over into another realm of fame and notoriety, and it's very easy to parody Stevie Nicks. You put the hat on, you put the chiffon on and the silk, and you twirl around, and everyone goes, you're doing Stevie Nicks. And that's a great thing, you know. That's I think that's a rather sort of flattering thing. And there are a few singers on this list who you could do that with immediately. She has an unquantifiable charisma that her many tens of thousands of fans absolutely love her for. And I think she's a good example of one of those singers that until you've actually really seen her live, you don't really get the full scope of her appeal. Number 5, Bruce Dickinson. Now, what can you say about Bruce Dickinson? I have seen Iron Maiden live probably nearly 20 times, and he has never not given it everything. He's an absolute ball of energy. We know he's a pilot, he's a fencer, he's a writer, and of course a lead singer. So, he's clearly got some kind of attention deficit disorder. Can't keep still on stage. But he's got this enormous voice, the air raid siren. Martin Birch, the Iron Maiden's producer in the early days, famously said, Iron Maiden couldn't go on to the next level until they replaced Paul Di'Anno and had a singer who had a voice that would just soar over the music. And that's exactly what they got when they found Bruce Dickinson from Samson. He has such a unique power in his voice. Martin Birch knew it would appeal to a great many people all over the world. And live Iron Maiden themselves, the whole band, gives so much of themselves. They really do. And Bruce, of course, is out front leading that. It's not just the energy. There's a wonderful lack of pretense about Iron Maiden, despite the stage setting and the wonderfully ludicrous lyrics and everything. They're very, very unpretentious. At the end of the day, they just want to get on stage, put on as good a show as they possibly can, and probably go off stage and have a beer or a glass of wine if you're Nico McBrain. At number 4, David Bowie. Now, David Bowie has led a few bands over the years, most famously the Spiders from Mars, and he's adopted many personas, and they've all hit the mark. I mean, undoubtedly, I think he's the finest artist on this list, and that's a very, very important point to make, because Bowie was always creating his images and moving them on before they got boring. There's a dangerous sexiness to Bowie's image. There's an intelligence in everything he does. There's a coolness. I mean, he can strike a pose at a gig, and it looks like a still from a film, but the image will stay with you long after the gig is finished. Of course, he's got that chameleon-like voice as well, which he can manipulate as each song or persona demands. I think in later years he relaxed a bit, and elements of that Bowie mystery sort of were peeled away, and some of the music later on lost a little bit of its power. But I think certainly since he's died, the mythology around Bowie has only intensified, and we look back at some of those performances now through very, very merited rose-tinted glasses, and they seem even more mythological now. He really does seem like some kind of alien-like rock star figure who has been sent from the gods to entertain us. And there's that famous line after he died: "We should all be very grateful that we happen to live in a time that coincided when David Bowie was on this earth." And I get that, I really do. At number 3, Bruce Springsteen. So I know Bruce is kind of stuck behind a guitar for a lot of his show, but he's just as comfortable coming out front. He's famous for these legendarily long shows. But what I love about Bruce, and you can read this in his autobiography, he says that from the very, very early days, even when he was playing to one man and his dog, he decided he was going to go out and give it absolutely everything. Literally, if there was only one person in the audience, and to this day, I say to my bandmates, if there's no one out there, it doesn't matter. We're going to go out and do a Bruce. We're going to go out and give it absolutely everything. And I think he has honed his craft so well over the years. He's just got better and better and better. What would Bruce do, you ask yourself, in a situation on stage? I saw him not long ago at Wembley Stadium, and I had pretty bad seats towards the back, but he really did make it feel like, a sitting room. That's kind of an exaggeration, but you get what I'm saying. When he tells his stories, he draws you in, and there's a lot of public displays of affection with his band, which creates such a positive, happy vibe. He knows show business, and he knows all the buttons to press. He's also a fabulous singer. He has that low, intimate kind of voice that he can do for the acoustic songs, and then he can really, really let rip and just open the space up, take the roof off the stadium with that big rasping voice. There's a Little Richard element to a lot of what he does. In fact, there's a Little Richard element to a number of these singers on this list. There are a lot of singers who owe the late Little Richard a great debt. But I have seen Bruce many times, and he has never, ever let me down. Now these top two, oh gosh, I have thought about these top two over and over again, wondering who to put where. So I think you could probably say that they're completely interchangeable. But for the purposes of this list, I'm going to put number two, put Mick Jagger, obviously from the Rolling Stones. Mick Jagger is an absolute phenomenon, an absolute phenomenon. I think, you know, most of you probably have just seen him on film, I suppose. And again, until you see him live, you just don't get the utter exuberance and immersion in his role that he has. He really is an eighth wonder of the world. He's got all these trademark moves that we can copy straight away. Random hand clap, shake your hips. You know, I'm sorry, I'm embarrassing myself. But, you know, we can all parody Mick Jagger. And if that's not the sign of somebody who completely crossed over into part of the culture outside of what they're famous for, then I don't know what it is. It's a huge compliment. And again, look, Jagger is not the world's greatest singer, although I do think he is a fine singer. He's a massively influential singer. There are so many bands and artists who copied that low sort of, you know, drawl delivery that he made famous in the 60s. Before that, no one was doing that. They were all singing like Pat Boone or you know, and then Jagger and Dylan came along roughly at the same time and changed everything as far as vocalists go. He absolutely carries the Stones on stage and off. You know, there are times on stage where the band is sort of shuffling slower and slower, almost till the music falls apart, but he's still out front, giving it everything, running from one side of the stage to the other. I first saw the Stones over 30 years ago, and I saw them again a couple of years ago, and he's still doing exactly the same show, the same amount of energy. It's incredible. The other thing, you know, about Jagger is that as the leader of the Rolling Stones, from a kind of business and logistical point of view, it's, as someone who's been in bands all my life, I know how hard it is to keep a band going. You know, there are so many elements that you have to take into account, so many little political things and personality things that you have to, you know, these plates that you have to shuffle just to keep everyone happy and keep things moving forward. And for Jagger to have done it for so long, so well, it's nothing short of remarkable. It really is. I think Jagger is not just a national treasure. I think he's a worldwide treasure, and I really do think for everything he brings to music, his professionalism, his performance, the influence he's had, I really do think the world is going to be a lesser place when the Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger are no longer in it. Which brings me to my number one lead singer, and you may have guessed it, the eagle-eyed ones amongst you, looking at the decorations around the room, is Freddie Mercury from Queen, of course. Freddie Mercury. I was lucky enough to see Queen with Freddie twice in 2 days at Wembley Stadium, and to this day I think they're probably still the two best gigs I've ever been to. And I've been to a lot of gigs without wishing to blow my own trumpet. But look, we all know about Freddie's vocal ability. It's peerless. The skill he has as a singer, the attack and the power he has as a singer is almost unrivaled. But, you know, he has this craft of bringing the crowd in to a show and really making them feel part of it very, very early on. You know, he wants people to sing along. The band's music is constructed to involve the crowd, and they had the perfect frontman for that. We all know about the Day-O, Day-O and all that kind of stuff, but there's so much more to it than that. All throughout the show, he's preening and prancing about, always has a glint in his eye. He knows exactly how ridiculous he looks, but he could not care less because he knows we are loving it and he's loving it as well. He definitely developed his craft. If you watch early Queen shows and listen to early Queen records, you can hear somebody who's a bit less confident with the between song banter particularly. But then as the live shows go on and the band develops over the years and get a bit older, by the time he hits Wembley Stadium and does Live Aid, he's a much more robust character in so many ways. He's got a bit more muscle on him. His image is slightly different. His voice is a bit thicker by that point as well. But the confidence, the stridence with which he comes out on stage and grabs the crowd by the scruff of their neck and says, "We're going to have a great time tonight." And oh my God, we did. Rami Malek's performance as Freddie in the film was fantastic. But I think, there's so much cynicism and aloofness in music now, and I think Rami played it with a little bit of that. And I think the truth about Freddie is Freddie always had a real glint in his eye. Whenever you watch him being interviewed or on stage, there's a fierce intelligence and mischievous there in his personality that I don't think Rami Malek quite captured. And that's again another thing I love about performers like Freddie. You watch it and it's so preposterous when you watch it now. It's so unique and so ridiculous. There's no one really like him anymore because performers now are too cool for school. Again, there's that aloofness. There's that don't put a foot wrong. And who cares about putting a foot wrong? You just go out there and put on a show. The show must go on. The spontaneity, his physical interaction and presence, vocal improvisations. Freddie could make songs you have heard 1,000 times sound just as exciting as the first day you heard them when he sang them live. And so I guess, for those reasons, I'm putting Freddie at number 1. I could easily just have put Jagger at number 2, but I have to say I do think the top 2 singers on this list are almost in a class of their own, which might be a bit unfair to Bruce. I don't know. But look, this is one of those lists where we're never going to agree, maybe on a couple of placings and stuff, but I'm dying to know what you think. Now, I know I've left loads of people out. Steve Tyler, who I just felt was a little bit too jaggery, really. Bon Scott, I thought was a brilliant frontman. Brian Johnson was a great frontman. Jim Morrison had his style. Ozzy, of course, Ronnie James Dio. I mean, there are so many other rock singers. But look, I did give this a lot of thought, and I did end up with these 10. I'm sure I'll think of someone else I've forgotten, and you'll remind me, and we can discuss it in the comments below. But look, I hope you enjoyed it. That's my list for this week. Back to records next week. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Okay, bye.